Today's guest is very special, an author, an award-winning embroidery artist, mother, teacher, and also known as Salt Stitches. Emily Bothelo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very
so
much.
Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It sounds weird being introduced so formally.
Well, it's all true. So take it in.
I have to remind myself of that a lot of the time. It is true.
Hello, makers. Welcome to the Making Conversation podcast, where we chat all about making, the app, and the act. My name is Jen. I'm head of marketing here at Making. My pronouns are she, her, and my Making app username is Knit Pearl. Every podcast where I interview somebody, we start off with the very beginning. Tell us your maker story. When did this all begin?
I feel like mine is a little bit unconventional, and I've touched on it before in previous interviews. I think a lot of people have like a really heartwarming story about being taught embroidery or, being taught how to sew by a family member or like by a parent or grandparent. Mine is completely out of left field. So I had a really difficult time with my mental health at the tail end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time sort of not isolated, but kind of by myself by the sea. And it was just something that kind of came out of nowhere. I had free time for the first time in a long time. And I was gifted some embroidery threads, like machine embroidery threads from a very good friend of mine. And I just kind of experimented a little bit. And that really is sort of the origin story of Salt Stitches. Like I had never embroidered anything before then. I'd never really sewn anything before then. I'd had a career in fashion, but I couldn't have sewn a button onto, a blouse if I'd needed to. It did very much come from left field. And yeah, it's been a very strange journey because of how it started, that there hasn't been more of like an exploration into sort of textiles or sewing in general. It was just this one thing that happened, and here we are six years later.
I love that. What was your background in fashion? What were you doing?
I like a lot of kids started working in retail quite young, and that progressed to taking on more like management roles. I ended up working for Celine for a couple of years, managing a boutique. Oh, I did too at the time. And they themselves are a great company to work for and fantastic experience to have, but the environment was incredibly toxic. And it definitely contributed to the aforementioned difficult time with mental health. So yeah, it was, I had a lot of experience with different fabrics, and I can tell you how to wash anything under the sun. I can tell you where most things are made. But a completely different skill set, in my opinion, to what I'm doing now. It gives me an appreciation for fabrics and workmanship to this day. I can tell if something's well made, because I've had a lot of experience with very well made garments. But yeah, the embroidery was definitely sort of like to the side of that.
Your art is super beautiful. You mentioned being by the water, and as a Pisces Cancer, being near water is very healing for me as well. So I understand that.
Yeah.
But lots of inspiration with your art from outdoor spaces and places from around the world. So tell us more about how your style landed there.
It's kind of a combination of a couple of things. Number one, I have always been somewhat of a photographer. It's never been a professional situation, but very amateur, but very enthusiastic. So I've always documented everything that I've done. I've always taken pictures of everything that I've done. Anybody who's ever followed me on my personal Instagram account, it's a running joke of, I take pictures of everything. So I think the environment that I was in, I was just taking pictures like I would normally have done, but maybe because I was in a space where I had freedom and there was no expectations of my time, I was maybe looking at things in a little bit more detail than I would have been ordinarily, which is gave me sort of the starting point of those first pieces that I was working on. It definitely started with the images first, and then it was what could I do with those images, which is where the embroidery sort of came in. The first piece I ever made, which isn't even in a hoop anymore, I took it out of a hoop because I needed the hoop for something else, um, is very, very similar to the last piece I've ever made, as far as the subject matter and the process behind it. So yeah, I think that was it. I think I just happened to be the kismet of being immersed in an environment that, makes me feel calm and makes me
Mm-hmm.
feel happy, gave me the space to just kind of explore without any, expectation of what that was going to be. Like, I wasn't setting out to, I'm going to be an artist today and I'm going to make something. And, that wasn't the case. It was just a very sort of natural progression of, I had time to fill for the first time in a long time.
Do you feel like this process led to letting go of any sort of perfectionism that you maybe had?
Oh, 1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I do say to people quite often, because in the past I have done DIY kits and I have taught in-person workshops, is one of the beauties of what I think my style gives people is that there is no right or wrong answer. When you decide something is finished,
Mm-hmm.
it's finished. There's no PDF pattern. And God love PDF patterns for the the people who have got that brain and the patience for it. I am not that person.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to have a color outside the lines mentality and decide when something is done, again, has been very, very beneficial to my mental health and letting go of like other people's expectations or other people's limitations on
Mm-hmm.
what it is that I'm doing. I try to pass that on to other people when I talk about embroidery and art in general, of,
Yeah.
set yourself free. Like,
Yes.
nobody knows what it's supposed to look like. It's all you.
I'm mostly a knitter. I do some embroidery, very new at that. I do some crochet, very new at that. But I've been knitting for quite a while. And with any fiber art, it always blows my mind when somebody can go off pattern,
Yeah,
especially with like making like a piece of clothing, right?
yeah,
Sewing to me, like just someday I'll get there. Someday I'll get there when I have the extra time.
yeah.
That's maybe when I retire, that will be my new thing because I know that if I start sewing, no one will ever see me. Um,
Nobody saw me for 2018 or 19 for that matter.
oh yeah, you
Yeah,
just dove straight in because it was
yeah,
so healing.
yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. I have felt this, pull to, I don't know, let go of this part of me that is all about being perfect,
Yeah.
right? I think, especially as female identifying people, that's kind of what we've been taught growing up,
Oh,
right? Like, and
100%.
not necessarily from our mothers or fathers, but just society in general, right?
School, employment,
Yes.
every. I went to an all girls school, and I can vividly remember the underlying message being that we had to do twice as much to be taken half as seriously.
Mm,
And it was a progressive school. It was very much, you can do anything as women, but it will be harder for you because you are a woman.
yeah.
And I think we all, regardless of what background we've come from, I think society definitely is set up that women are supposed to be able to do it all, but also reminding us at all times that we can't have it all. So
Mhm.
we have to sort of pick a lane. And
Yeah.
it's difficult. It is difficult. And it's difficult to unlearn that in adulthood, that
Mhm.
actually a lot of the times you can do what you want.
Yeah.
You just have to sort of let go of caring so much about what other people think about you doing whatever you want.
Yes.
And I still struggle
Yeah.
with it. I still very much struggle with it.
Oh, yeah. I feel like there's been so much unlearning that I've personally been doing over the last, I don't know, 5 years specifically.
Yeah.
And those things will still pop up. And I'm
Yeah.
like, damn it. I've worked so hard. Why is this
Yeah.
happening? But it's so deep down that
Yeah.
it's going to always be a thing. It might just
And I
show
have
up.
the joy. I have an almost 14-year-old daughter.
Mm,
So I get to watch it through parents' eyes of how she's sort of exploring that. She's
yeah.
not she is creative, but she's creative in very different ways to me. So it's interesting to see how she sort of deals with the idea of perfection or the idea of like things being perfect at all times.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, that's fun getting to do it second time round.
Let's go back to, pulling inspiration from the places that you've been to. If you could pick two places that were the most memorable for you, where are they and why?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. Um, I have to answer Switzerland as a blanket answer.
Okay, that's
Um,
fair.
for those people who haven't followed me on Instagram and haven't seen why Switzerland became such a big part of my work for a long period of time, my husband was fortunate enough to have a contract role in Switzerland that meant our entire family could move there for an extended period of time. And we did that twice. We did that in 2018 in summer and 2019 in summer. And from somebody who had previously been a single parent who had worked full time and for very little money, being able to have ultimate freedom and have my child with me and us be outside every day and be by the water every day was nothing short of a miracle. Um,
Yeah.
and add in the fact that we were in such a beautiful place, like a beautiful part of the world, and the landscapes that we've just never experienced before. It was just transformative in every sense of the word for our entire family. Um, we are desperately trying to get back there every single day. um, but yeah, it was just, getting to experience the Alps, getting to experience like glacial areas, getting to experience just flora and fauna that we'd never seen before, rock formations we'd never seen before. It was a smorgasbord of inspiration of somewhere that possibly beforehand I'd probably written off as not that much of an interesting part of the world. When you think of your bucket list places to visit, I don't think it would have been sort of top 5.
Mhm.
Now it's top spot.
It's above number one.
Yeah, it is the goal.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the ultimate answer to that question.
Mhm.
And then another one would probably be, I'd have to say Manchester
Mm.
before we emigrated and during the pandemic, because what it forced me to do, because my work is so dependent on the landscapes that I get to explore,
Mm.
for those reference textures, what it forced me to do was look in unusual places to find those textures that were close to home, because I
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
have the option to travel. And it was very important to me to not just start using stock imagery or, sourcing third party images elsewhere. So I think, yeah, that was the second one, being able to sort of readjust how my mind looked for textures
Mhm.
closer to home. So yeah, those would be my two places.
Cool. I like the idea of, like, kind of having to stretch that. I don't
Yeah,
know, muscle's not the right word, but you know what I mean? Like,
it's just an outlook. Like, I am the running joke of my family if we're out on walks or we're out anywhere, even in urban environments, that I'm usually 60 feet behind, taking a picture of a lamppost or taking a picture of some gross thing on the floor that, looks colorful in the right light. It's become a running joke. But my mindset really did have to sort of change in during that time, because I'd made this my job. So it had
Yeah.
to still be sustainable.
We talk about our values a lot. Before we even created the app, we wrote out our values. How do your values come through in your art?
It's something I've thought about a lot because I think that, rightly or wrongly, artists, makers, crafters, whatever umbrella you fall under, I think a lot of the times we are under more intense levels of scrutiny for things like that because we choose to put our work out there, and we choose to, a lot of the time, it is so intrinsically linked with our life as well. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
us posting our art. We talk about family, we talk about whatever. So I've
Yeah.
been thinking a lot about that, about how, things that are important to me and how I sort of present them to the world. But I'm also a big believer in, you can't fix everything, and you need to give yourself grace that you can't fix everything.
Yeah.
Things that I try and promote as much as possible is most of my supplies, most of, the things that I use to create my work, I try and shop as small as possible. I
Mm-hmm.
try and stick to small, locally owned, female owned, POC owned, Indigenous owned, particularly because I use a lot of beads in my work.
Yeah.
I'm conscious that I live in Canada and beadwork is not a white woman's craft. It's not come
Mm-hmm.
from ours. So when people ask me specifically, where I get my supplies from, I try and promote as many small businesses as possible. And from a sustainability point of view, I do buy a lot of thread secondhand. I learned a long time ago with the internet that you can actually only be yourself. When you try and be somebody else, it is very destructive very quickly.
Yeah.
So I kind of try and just foster authenticity. And like, if people are going to ask me a question, I'm going to give them an honest answer. If anybody wants to know my opinion on anything from a socio-political perspective, I will be completely honest. It's
Mm-hmm.
not I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm
Yeah.
not ashamed to talk about my belief systems,
Yeah.
but I'm just not going to argue with idiots in my inbox because it doesn't solve anything.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It's I've said this before on the podcast, but when we post I mean, even the other day we got an email and this person was like, I used to, because Making used to be a magazine. I don't know if you
Yeah,
know that, but it used to be a fiber arts magazine. And then
yeah.
we stopped creating that and then started the app. And somebody was announcing their departure
Oh,
because
okay.
we become too woke. And I'm like,
Oh, that old chestnut. Okay, yeah,
yeah, yeah. I was like,
yeah.
okay, well, bye.
You don't
Like,
need to announce that you're leaving. You can just leave.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
the reason that we're so loud about our values is because we're working so hard to create a space where diversity is celebrated and human rights is um, right at the forefront so that everybody
oh,
feels comfortable
absolutely,
coming into the space, you know?
absolutely. I have learned that, as my daughter would say, the trash takes itself out.
Oh, we've said that many times. I've
Yeah,
said that on this podcast. That's my favorite thing. The
yeah.
trash has taken itself
It's
out.
it doesn't need to announce its way out. It's
No.
fine. Yeah. But I do find there definitely is. What I find really interesting about the community that I've sort of been very lucky to be a part of, with in this maker space and Instagram and everything that comes along with that, is um, it is it, it does get a bit echo chambery in the fact that we
Yeah.
all do seem to be on the same sort of page, and when there are people that are not, as I would say, on the right side of compassion, um, they do tend to stand out, which I think is a luxury in this community. That
Hmm.
it is very easy to spot the people that aren't on the sort of same page as you, when
Yeah.
it comes to human rights and just general, well, like I say, compassion.
We talk a lot about leading with kindness and compassion. And I think that kind of embodies all of that put together.
True.
So, Well, let's talk about your book because you are an author. I don't know if this is too close to the camera. Hold on. My
It's still not.
webcam here.
I have literally one in front of me. It still doesn't. It's not. It's not real life.
This is your book.
Yeah, this is my book.
So
This is my
cool.
book.
I love it. How did you begin this part of your journey and of putting together a book, and how did you curate the projects?
I moved to Canada at the middle of August 2021,
Mhm.
and I got a call from the team at Search Press the first week of September 2021. And I said no. I said no a couple of times, I believe,
Mhm.
because in my mind I was like, absolutely not. I have no time. There's no way anybody would be interested in a book about anything that I do or whatever. And I can't wrap my mind around that as a concept. And the team were very persuasive, but also very friendly is the underlining word, and
Mhm.
assured me they would very much hold my hand throughout the entire process, and that they've worked with lots of people who have no idea what they're doing in, creating a book, and that was their job to take care of that side. My job was obviously like the creative side. Similarly to the questions you're asking about what places are or became the most important or became the most influential, it started with a lot of questions. So we sat down and talked about the idea of, the coast, whatever the coast looks like, wherever geographically that is, how important that has been to my journey and the start of my work. And then Switzerland became sort of alpine as a category. And as I touched upon with Manchester and, having to look for textures closer to home, we sort of umbrellaed that under urban and man-made textures. And I was determined that I wanted to create completely new work. I wasn't going to feature work from archives, for the basis of the book. I wanted them to all be new projects so that I could really spend the time to try and intellectualize how I made each decision for each step of making them, so that I could obviously explain that to whoever reads the book,
Yeah.
which resulted in a lot of late nights of me going, I just make the decision because I want to make the decision, and trying to talk myself into, writing that down and making that a bit more coherent. But yeah, like it took 2 years pretty much, and it was an incredible experience, and it taught me a lot more about how I value my own work, which I
Mm.
hadn't really given myself space for in the past. Like, I think I'd just been on such a journey of just keep making them and just like, I'm enjoying it, so keep doing it. I think
Yeah.
having a project that was so structured and I had to talk about it in such a way gave me a new appreciation for what it is that I'm making.
I think a lot of makers who create because they sell
Yeah.
things can fall into that,
Yeah.
right? Like you're just trying to like keep doing stuff and like it
Yeah.
might still feel good, but sometimes you lose the appreciation of what you're creating, right?
Well, I used to joke that if money was no object, and this hadn't morphed into a business and an income and a full-time job, I joked that I would still make them every day, and I would just they just accumulate and the wall would get much fuller, which to some extent is still true. But what the book sort of allowed me to do, because I decided very early on I was going to do 3 large scale pieces, which do take an awful lot of time to
Mhm.
complete. And there was no pressure of them being a commercial piece. Like the point of making them was not for them to be sold. The point of making them was, to feature in the book. I was able to take my time with them more so than I ever have before. And I was able to really thoroughly enjoy the process of working in large scale, which is how I prefer to work anyway. Um,
Mhm.
and what that has led to is me making some like quite definitive decisions about my work going forward, and maybe, you know, the things that I have made in the past because I know they're likely to sell better, or I know they're more commercially successful, so I've made more of them. I've decided to stop making those completely
Yeah.
and focus more on, you know, the larger scale things. I'm sat here looking at a 30-inch hoop that hasn't been started yet. um, with the idea that, you know, that is why this began in the first place. It was me enjoying making it, and you know, of what it brought to me and what it brought to my mental health. So I think the
Mhm.
book has sort of forced my hand back a few years and sort of reevaluate why I'm making what I'm making,
Yeah.
which obviously comes from a place of privilege when it comes to the money aspect of it. Like I do still need to
Mhm.
make a living, but I have taken a step back and said I can make less of a living and make what I am more proud of putting out into the
Mhm.
world.
Yeah.
So the book has definitely sort of
Yeah.
distilled that down for me.
Though you might not be making the thing that sells more,
Yes.
the love that you put into these larger pieces, you know, maybe more people will pick up on that, right? And it
Well,
won't be making less as a living
yeah,
because
I mean, it's no coincidence that, you know, one of the pieces that is featured in the book that was me sort of slowing down and definitely putting more thought and more love and more time into what I'm making was the piece that went into the art competition and won the art competition. So I
Mhm.
don't think that is a coincidence. But it,
Yeah.
you know, it wasn't something that was just made to sell. And, you know, it was a piece based on a particular place in Switzerland. So from an emotional standpoint, there's a lot more heart in that piece specifically than there is in a lot of my other work that just, you know, gets made. I mean, there's heart in all of them, but some
Mhm.
are much more sentimental than others. And I think
Yeah.
that it is no coincidence that that was one that people obviously resonated with enough to vote.
The other part of Ashley and I working together, we have a like consulting agency called MKNG. We work with a lot of different kinds of companies, but we do have a lot of people within the craft and art industry as well. And one thing that we talk about more often than not is the energy that we put into what we're doing
Yeah.
and how it needs to be bringing joy at some level. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, there are things that will never bring joy, like taxes and bookkeeping, at least for me. But,
But you
like,
speak to accountants that live in numbers and they live
yes,
for it. So, you know,
I will give you
different
some
different
work. Yeah.
side different side of the brain.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I feel like this really goes along with that, right? Like the
Yeah.
energy that you're putting into this thing.
Yeah.
Our energy is so precious. And I don't know, really focusing it on things that bring joy and happiness and, you know, will those things are going to help us grow into a very different direction than just like, okay, I'm going to create this because
Yeah.
people like it and they will buy it, you know?
Sure. And I think the other side of that is because I can only speak for myself, but I know a lot of people in a similar situation. This was never intended to be a business. So this was never something that I sat down and, you know, wrote a business plan or a 5-year projection or,
Mhm.
you know, decided what my KPIs were going to be for a certain amount of time. It evolved into that just because I chose to start sharing it on the internet, and, you know, I chose to give myself a moniker rather than use my name and all of that kind of stuff. I think it's very easy to get flattered by the attention of people wanting to buy your work and to get swept up in the process of it becoming a business.
Mhm.
I think if I could give advice to anybody who's sort of starting out on the cusp of this, or has experimented and found a new thing that they're making that people want to sell, you don't have to say yes to everything. You can say no. Like if people want DIY kits, you can say no. You don't have to pour all of your energy into, you know, something adjacent to what you're doing. If people want you to start teaching workshops, that's great, and you'll meet lots of amazing people and it'll be really fun. But you can also say no if it's not something that
Yeah.
your heart is necessarily 100% in. And I think if I had my time again, I would have done a lot of things very differently,
Yeah.
to protect my energy when it comes to making. And the times where I've been very close to sort of burning out, I think I would have avoided if I'd have said no
Yeah.
a few more times.
Yes. And, there is space for dabbling in something that might seem exciting at the time and then realizing
Yeah,
it's not quite what you want to do. But,
absolutely.
especially as creative people in a capitalistic society, it's like how
Yeah.
many times have I been like, I knit? And people are like, knit me a sweater, I'll buy it from you. And I'm like, no,
No, because you,
this is my precious time. This is
yeah,
my
yeah.
meditation. This is my moment. But
I had
yeah, it's
a
difficult.
I had a DM exchange recently with somebody, and no shade or hate to the person. She was just, we weren't on the same page. Wanted an opportunity for me to teach a private workshop, which I have done before.
Mhm.
And so I explained, how my workshops have run in the past, like the format of them, how long they tend to take. And her response was that that was way too long, ergo way too expensive for the time. And what she wanted was something to last a couple of hours and to make something very small. And she was like, well, how long does it take to make something this small? I'm like, okay, well,
Mhm.
it takes me a full day and I've been doing it for 6 years. So I imagine if I'm teaching a room full of people who've never done it before, I'm going to say maybe a week as an
Yeah.
educated guess. And she got quite offended. I'm like, I don't mean to be offensive. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think your mind is on the same page as me because it's not something that you do
Mhm.
every day. And I think that's also half the battle with makers and artists at the moment is people appreciating the time that goes in. Just because to some person it might look relatively simple, or we can condense the process down on social media into a reel for 30 seconds, does not
Mhm.
mean that that has not been, literal hours of
Yeah.
work.
A couple of months ago, we recorded a podcast all about pricing, and a lot of these themes came up, right? And the idea of craft not being as valued as it
Yeah.
should. We're about to launch our full marketplace on the Making app, but the fact that like these other marketplaces Etsy,
Mhm.
will suggest such low pricing when people go to sell their items. And
I
when
know.
people are just starting out, this is their suggestion, right? And
Which ends up damaging everybody because you have people
yes,
coming into a marketplace thinking, oh, I have to be competitive in order to, to find a space or a seat at the table. But by then
yes,
doing that, they're then damaging everybody else's ability to charge what they're worth for their time. Um,
yeah,
and I think mainstream consciousness is waking up to it a little bit more because we have so much dialogue about fast fashion and
hmm
about the work that goes into making garments and things like that. But one that's always an excellent example to use is when people talk about crochet, because you see a lot of clothing that is crocheted that can't be replicated by a machine. So anything that you
yeah,
see that is crocheted is made by hand. And if you are buying something that is, $5, that person who made that is not
yeah,
getting paid for their time. Um,
yeah,
by the same token, you then have things crocheted on Etsy for $500 that the average consumer thinks is extortionate because they can also see a similar style garment, on Sheen for the same,
oh,
So it's like I think people are waking up more to the value of craft in that aspect, but I think we've got a long way to go.
how do you structure when you go in to price your items? How do you structure your pricing? And do you have advice for those that are struggling with like the balance of pricing handmade items, but also, you know, still trying to be somewhat accessible to people?
I have almost two simultaneous opinions that
Mhm.
are a little bit different.
Yeah.
Um, and I've been honest about this in the past. Nobody needs to buy a piece of my embroidery work. It's not a necessity. It is very much a luxury purchase, and luxury in the sense that nobody needs it to survive. Nobody is entitled to it. Nobody should have it as a human right. It is very much a frivolous, piece of something that people want to buy, and I acknowledge that. At the same time, I am acutely aware that I personally would like to be as accessible as possible to as many different people as possible, because I think art should also be accessible. I don't think it should be reserved for people who have thousands of dollars of disposable income. How I originally chose to combat those two differing opinions was to be able to offer different sizes of work with comparable pricing, so that not everybody, of course, is going to be able to spend thousands of dollars on a huge piece of embroidery, but the chances are quite a lot of people are going to be able to spend $80 to $100 on a smaller piece of embroidery if they wanted to purchase it. And that is where I have struggled with the consumption and burnout of constantly making things so that it's accessible to everybody. So I've had to take a step back from offering the more affordable side of things, because I can't keep up with. I'm one person. My art isn't scalable. I can't get somebody else to do it. I can't outsource any aspect of the production. It's, it is handmade. I have also really struggled with how to price my work for the time that it takes. To put it into perspective, I'm paying myself probably a third of minimum wage, and that's if a piece sells. So if you work out the time it takes to make it, the time it takes to get all the equipment, buy all the equipment, the cost of materials, I'm definitely making maybe like $4 an hour per piece, maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm in a position where I can do that, and that's okay. Like I don't need to push my prices up to cover a minimum wage situation. But yeah, it's hard. Pricing is so hard.
It is. It's really hard. It's a delicate
balance.
I
find really difficult is if I finished a piece and I haven't really connected with it, my first instinct is for it to be sold for less.
Oh.
Which is that's a new thought that has crept in the last few months. When I have, when I'm looking at something that I personally haven't maybe enjoyed as much as like the previous one or whatever, my instant gut reaction is to price it lower, which I think I have some more work to do on myself and valuing my time and my expertise, because that's not right. But that is something that has crept up recently. I think I'm very grateful anytime anybody buys any of my pieces. I don't think that feeling will ever go away.
Okay, do you have a favorite project in the book? I know it's like choosing a favorite child, but
I mean, I also have a favorite child. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay. Tell us more.
The cover picture from the book, which was the first coastal project, is incredibly special. The photograph, the texture itself, is from a place in Anglesey, in North Wales, which was where I was when I was very unwell. It was then made in Canada. I made it, at home, and photographed by my husband. He does have professional photography credit for the cover of the book, in a place called Port Bruce, which is just a little place, just a short drive from where I live now, on the shore of Lake Erie, which has become sort of my de facto sort of Welsh placeholder while I live landlocked. Lakes are a new experience for me. And it felt like a very full circle moment of somewhere that has been, or a piece that has been inspired by where it sort of all started, making its way and being photographed and ending up on the book where I've ended up. So that is actually the first and only piece I've kept for myself. So the piece that's on the front cover is, I mean, I don't know if you can see it. It is, it's just up here.
There it is.
It's not going anywhere. That's staying here. And it felt quite poignant to keep that one, actually. So yeah, that's my favorite. But I'll change my mind again in 6 months' time. I'll have made something else.
I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. The like 3D and the textures, and
thank you.
It's gorgeous. I love the use of shells.
Yes.
And are those beads inside?
Yes.
The shell? Yeah. It's gorgeous.
With a few exceptions during the pandemic where I had to outsource the collection of shells to people who lived in locations where there were shells.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the shells featured on pieces have come from where those textures were found. So if it's a coastal piece, those have come from maybe not the exact location, but geographically close enough from where those textures were photographed, as just a way of having something connected to the physical location. I don't think I really talk about that a lot either, but just that I've been doing.
I don't know. I feel like there's an energy with something physical from a place that like sticks with it.
Sure.
You know, we're going to get a little woo-woo right now. And but yeah, that's so beautiful that it is connected to the space. Do you have any advice for somebody who is watching who has maybe been like, I kind of want to write a book about craft or create a pattern book or something around creativity? Do you have advice, do's or don'ts?
Do it, number one. Yeah. There's been so many conversations I've been having with people recently about the passing of time. Like, time passes anyway. So, you know, even if it seems like it's this massive project that you think is going to take years to finish, and it's going to be so much work and so many different components, that time will pass anyway. So you either do it and the time passes at the same time, or you have the same conversation with yourself 3 years from now and you haven't started. If you are apprehensive about it, don't tell anyone about it. Like, nobody needs to know that you have. And I mean, I've personally started writing down ideas rather than trying to sound them out with anybody. So nobody knows how many times I fail at the things that I've decided I'm going to try. Who cares?
Is it really a failure though?
No, but I think that there's beauty in failure, because the more times you fail, the less scary it becomes and the more likely you are to try something again. Because the idea of failure, or the idea of perceived failure, can be so scary. But the more times it happens, it's just like, oh, that one didn't work. Try again.
And you learn something new about yourself and the situation every single time.
Absolutely. I like to consider myself, I'm the complete sum of all my failures. And if I hadn't failed most spectacularly in the ways that I have failed in my life, I wouldn't have had half of the good things that have happened because of those failures. Like, it's I'm all for just giving it a go. And you'll be surprised how many people really, really resonate with what you have to say, and how many people end up being really proud of the result. That's been an unsuspected perk for me. Other people who have messaged me, mostly people that, you know, were already in my life, and friends and family and whatever, who have picked up a copy of the book despite me telling them that I can get them one. Who have had, you know, such wonderful things to say. And a lot of the time you don't know what people think about you until you give them something to sort of critique, I guess.
Every podcast episode, we end with a moment of gratitude. So
Okay.
what are you grateful for?
What am I not grateful for? I'm grateful that I woke up this morning. I'm grateful that the sun is shining, and touch wood, today has been a good day. I have made a conscious effort in the last 2 years that gratitude plays a huge part of my daily life in general. Tomorrow isn't promised. So I try to remember that at all times, especially when there's occasional bouts of road rage, or, something goes wrong, or the kids are being loud. But yeah, it's just gratitude in general. Grateful to be here.
I am I'm going through some changes in my life, and they're not all bad. They're just going to be different, and I'm just grateful for all of the people in my life saying that they're proud of me for making hard decisions and being there for me and checking in. And um I'm very fortunate that the people that I hold dear, friends, family, chosen family, have really shown up in an amazing way. So I'm grateful for all of them.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we had this conversation,
Thank you for
and
having
it
me.
was really awesome getting to know you.
You too.
Tell everyone where they can buy your book, where they can find you, and your art.
Yes. So, sort of all good bookstores. Every bookstore can order it in. I would personally recommend your local independent bookstore, but it
Mhm.
is also available on Amazon and all, chain stores across North America, Europe, and Canada. You can find me on Instagram at salt_stitches. Yeah, and everything I update there, really. I will at some point be starting a blog or a Substack to keep people a little bit more informed with what's going on. But all of that can be found through Instagram. Everything gets updated there first because I am very basic with technology. So
Thank you again for taking the time.
thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.